Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV and the third concluding part of our first look at living history reenactment, but it's definitely sparked quite a lot of interest. So we will absolutely be returning to this subject in the future and maybe bring up some of the meatier subjects. So the first part was with participants who get involved in the hobby side of it and why they do it and what they get out of it. The second part was with professionals who maybe have come from it as a hobby but now do it professionally. So Kate Vigers, Taff Gillingham, film work, work in public environments, shows, educational. And then today, the three people have all sort of seen reenactment. They've kind of witnessed it, but they are now involved in it as part of their profession. So we have a writer and someone who commentates on public events. We have Marcel, who's a photographer who accompanies others on reenactment trips and works with museums. And we have John, who works in the museum and has brought reenactors in to be involved with projects in their museum. So if you are new to the channel, please don't forget to click subscribe. Like every show you watch if you like them. Of course, it all helps with the algorithm. But I'm going to bring my guests in. So here we go. Here's everybody. So John Bernstein, Marcel Barnan, and Jonathan Ruffle. So that's our panel of three wise men to talk about this subject now. So let's go around. And our first question is what is your connection with living history reenactment? And if you want to, in that introduction, if you want to give a brief explanation of what you think the difference is between living history and reenactment, or use any kind of quantifying terms about language, that's the time to do it. We'll start with John over in the USA first. So, John, how did you get involved in living history professionally, and any kind of terms about the terminology we're going to use?
Let's see. I actually got started doing living history back in 1995. Got interested and met up with an Air Corps group near where I was, and began building. I was already, I was a history major in college. I was really interested in World War II. My granddad was a World War II vet. And so I started collecting stuff and found stuff that fit me. And so I started getting into it a little more and began doing air shows, and then on into tacticals and stuff like that. That was fun. That was good. But in my professional career, I was already tracking into museums. I was working at the National Warplane Museum up in Geneseo, New York, in '97. Did a little bit there, and then throughout my career, that led me to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where I actually built a living history program to help teach soldiers and help teach the public. As the director of the Air Defense Artillery Museum, my job was to educate soldiers on the history of their branch. And so the images you can see here, we had an M16 anti-aircraft half-track that we used as a mobile classroom. And it was extremely useful in teaching these young soldiers the history of their branch. Yeah, there I am. And showed them really that if they were going to be Avenger crews on the Avenger Humvee, the equipment and the skills that they had really were not all that different from what air defenders were doing in World War II. In fact, the Avenger has a 50 cal machine gun on it. So the half-track had 4, the Avenger's got 1 and 8 missiles. So a lot more similarities than differences. So for 8.5 years I was there. We ran the program, and it's still going on now. We did public displays at both the Field Artillery Museum and the Fort Sill Museum. And that ranged from, we had a Civil War gun crew for the Fort Sill Museum. And then for Field Artillery, we did pack howitzer demonstration. And then we had a standard evolution of the riflemen from the American Revolution up to the present. So usually I was instructing on 20th century weaponry. And it was extremely well received. Of course, a lot of blank firing, made a lot of noise, and really very, very popular with the public.
And that essentially is what going to be the theme tonight, is about visual storytelling, or in this case, in terms of firing weapons, visual and audio and smells. It's all senses. Yes. That was the thing that came up in the second show. It's about conveying history through all the senses. So we'll move to Jonathan Ruffle next now. So Jonathan, again, like with my guests, Taff Gillingham and Kate, and the previous show, it would be easy to list the things Jonathan hasn't been involved in over the years with regards to the sort of telling of history, but radio shows, production, commentary. But I'll let you explain yourself, Jonathan. What's your connection with living history? And if you want to again clarify any kind of terminology, what you think is meant by the word reenactment of living history, now's the time to do it. But how did you get involved, or how are you involved in it?
Well, I'll start with the last question first, if I may. I really don't mind what you're called. I'm a bit of a welcome aboard kind of person myself. I'm really happy to work with anyone and change what we do to suit who we're working with. And this is probably because I have a background in broadcasting. I've been working in broadcasting for over 40 years. And one of our sort of key skills is the ability to quickly adapt to what you've actually got, not what you actually haven't got. I was so interested in the two previous talks. I don't know if you know, I had a wonderful time listening to those and watching those, and great talks, great speakers, unlike myself at this particular moment, I noticed. And somebody was asked what was the first living history thing they ever touched, and I thought about it, and actually it was ration books. My grandfather, G.W. Ruffle, was a high-class provision merchant and ironmonger in Romford in beautiful Essex in Britain, and obviously they had a lot of ration books left over, and I used to play with these as a child, not really knowing what they were. So they were my first idea that history actually has a physical, manifestation. And I went into broadcasting. I went into the pop music end of broadcasting. But as a consequence of that, I actually went out to the Gulf, the first Gulf War, well before all the shooting started, I can assure you, because I was sort of collecting dedications from the troops and going around various bases. And I was in a couple of Scud alerts, but that's about as serious as it got, certainly none of the shooting war. And then I'd always had this ambition to do a drama based on Len Deighton's novel Bomber. And it went out as a day-long documentary drama on BBC Radio 4, which is a big speech channel here in the UK. And it was split up and it was actually broadcast in real time. And to this end, I did several things that prepped me in a living history way for what I was wanting to undertake. One of which was, and now pretty much everybody is going to want to stab me for saying this, but I flew on the Battle of Britain Memorial Lancaster because I wanted to get the appropriate sounds of the engines. We didn't want it to sound Mickey Mouse on the radio there. I also managed to blag my way through the radio station onto a diesel-powered submarine diving in the channel. I also flew across the Atlantic on a B-24 Liberator, which was all very well until an engine packed up over Greenland, and it got a bit too exciting, to be honest. Anyway, that's a story for another day. So I'm building up towards this drama called Bomber. And as a result of that, I was asked to produce some commentary, write and produce commentary at the Royal International Air Tattoo, which is one of the world's largest air shows. And we did things like, with my colleague Sean Maffett, a wonderful air show commentator, we did things like recreate the Berlin airlift with a ground element and an air element, and the convention that you were watching the aircraft taking off from outside Berlin, but now as they went around the circuit and landed, it was Berlin. Some nice dramatic ideas like that, and that turned into general commentary. I did, for example, the 940th of Hastings, which was 2,000 reenactors and 300 horses to a script and arranged a real blast. I even worked on the 2005 Trafalgar, the notorious one where there was the red navy and the blue navy, because nobody at that time wanted to say French and English. It was strange, but there you go. But it was 167 ships, which was a real blast. So I then became interested. I then worked in television comedy, which is why I'm such a miserable git in real life. And then coming into the 2000s, I had an ambition to do and we made it. We did it. It was a 42 episode real time drama about the First World War, broadcast on BBC Radio 4 over 4 years. And for that, I went and shot weapons, obviously, because I wanted to record those weapons. So we were using the right kind of MGs and everything like that. And I went and recorded over in Belgium, France, the Demineur blowing up old World War I ordnance. So if you heard a shell explode on this radio drama, you were actually hearing a sound no one had heard for 100 years. Because I'm not going to have some bloke hit something with a hammer, am I? Do a sound effect. I'm going to go and get a real explosion of a real World War I shell. Had to go and walk the ground for that kind of thing, that's how I kind of put living history into my work. As I say, I really enjoy working with living history people. That's going to come up later on during this thing, pretty obviously. And I don't mind what you call yourself. Come on, let's go and do something interesting in standing in a field. As we always used to say, I used to say to Sean, here we are, two silly old fools standing in a field, soaking wet, having a wonderful time. So that's kind of been it for me.
Well, thank you. What I like about that is already your use of the word living history is not quite the same as some of the guests who've been using it earlier in the week, because it's different things to different people. I mean, and particularly working in radio where you fill in the sounds and smells and things yourself with your imagination, then actually commentating on an air show when, you know, you'll talk about later, there are actually genuine explosions, there are aircraft coming in and there's bang, bang, bang things. It's that's the public don't need to have the imagination there because you're actually putting it there in front of them in a three-dimensional environment. So living history is different things to different people, which is important. But we'll move into our last guest now. So the only one from outside of the UK or US. We're over to the Netherlands now with Marcel. So
Yeah.
Again, another interesting thing, because you're kind of on the periphery of living history. You do put uniforms on so that you blend in with them, but you're there essentially to create visual imagery of it. So explain to us what it is you do and how you got into it.
All right. Well, I'm a Dutch visual designer and photographer, and I've been working commercially for the last 25 or more than 25 years. And basically doing work that has nothing to do with history or Second World War, for that matter, at all. And I attended a commemoration of the, I think it was the 65th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge with my son back then. And I started shooting some images because it was just exciting. And basically I shot anything with a helmet, so I didn't really care. And I edited them in a way that I was used to edit the images. And I've been working with Photoshop since version 1.0, which is like ancient. So basically I came from a totally different background. I wasn't really into history, or, well, I was into World War II because my grandfather was was a member of the Dutch resistance and later on attached to the 9th US Army. Back in 1944-45, but that was about it. And as I said, I started out with just capturing anything I saw then, and I really hadn't a clue that what was authentic or what wasn't. And I think it was in 2015 I ran into the guys of the 2nd Armored in Europe and other guys, and they really taught me and told me that don't do this because that's FARP. I had no clue what FARP meant, and I wasn't really aware what I was doing wrong because it all looked cool, as they said, soldiers in the forest, and that was about it. Well, and anyway, then I started sharing the images I had, and apparently I was doing something right because the overall look seemed to be very appealing to people, and so that tasted for more, and I wanted to, trying to see where that was going. And back then, as I said, it was just, I wasn't really aware I wasn't even aware of the living history terminology, and for me, there was just guys in the forest, and maybe it's a bit strange to say, but for me, it was just dressing up, From that point on, I slowly evolved and developed my own style. And one of the most important things was that I actually learned about the authentic reenactors, the living history reenactors, and everyone else. And that was a long journey for me, to be honest, because, I wasn't really aware what I was doing wrong when I showed guys that weren't really authentic. The image looks cool, and that was my starting point. But then at some points I was really having discussions. What's wrong with it? The guys having fun, haven't they? And looking back now, I just completely converted. I'm totally into authentic as much as possible, because it's history that actually dictates us how it should look, nothing else. And so basically I evolved and developed my own way of working, and got in touch, and I expanded my network with living history reenactors in all Western Europe. And I was lucky enough to meet some of the best, and best, like in my opinion, there's nothing that separates them from the real guys in World War II in regard to looks. As such, I got involved with museums, publishers like men like Michel Detré. I worked for those guys, and from one came the other. And right now I'm involved with a big project for the Overloon Warmuseum in the Netherlands, doing the art direction, basically. Last year I made a commemoration film for them, which was a very challenging, because we had about, soldiers from the Dutch army, the British army, Polish army, Canadian army, Americans, Germans, the RAF, the US Air Force, and so forth. And it's kind of challenging to raise the bar in that regard. And with that, you enter into a very it's almost kind of a minefield, because there's a lot of discussion: how hardcore should you be or become? Is there a budget? If it has to be, I mean, is it public? Is it non-public? And people tend to forget that in certain events, or at certain events, authenticity doesn't seem to be a high priority. The last, I would say, 3-4 years, or maybe 5 years, I've been just focusing on visualizing authentic living history reenactors. And I'm really came to a point that I'm very anxious to use the word reenactor, because the overall opinion about reenactors isn't that very positive. And so there's a lot of work to do. And with the work I'm doing, I try to, show the guys and the women, to be honest, that actually doing a great job and try to give their best in doing real living history and be authentic as possible. But it's a long way to go, and there's a long way in trying to convince the critics, and also trying to convince the young guys that started and don't have that big budget to buy all the right looking gear. So they come up with Chinese crap and just hope it looks cool, which it of course doesn't.
And so, you're bringing up. Sorry to interrupt.
No.
I mean, you're bringing up a good point about the money it costs to be a reenactor. It came up in the previous 2 shows. And if the world, and I don't know what I mean by the world, continues to view reenactment living history as a negative thing, so it's expensive to do it, and people think you're being an arse doing it anyway, why will new people be doing it? If the view of it's all just dressing up, it's all just not very good, why would you be a young person who want to get involved in a hobby where people are criticizing what you're doing? And before we go, I'm going to go to Jonathan Ruffle again. We'll do a different order and we go around again. Is that we can't do anything about crap reenactors. We can't do anything about the idiots who turn up. As I keep saying, I live in Normandy, one of the meccas for bad living history reenactment. When they all turn up, not all of them, some are good, but in June it all turns up, and the beards and the sunglasses and the shoulder holsters and the straight out of the bubble wrap equipment they bought a week before. I can't do anything about that. But what we can try and do is tell the wider world that there's a good end of living history. And we're going to come back to all of the ways in which you in your professions are using living history to tell stories visually. That's the subject. I said it earlier that we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to go to Jonathan and Ruffle then again now, because we just established that, you've done radio, you've done these big events. Essentially, you've seen these publics stand there and watch air shows. You've obviously got feedback for radio shows and all the different things you've done. How does a 3D visual environment recreating the past, how does that enhance our understanding of that history? Whoops.
I would probably start by saying that are you almost a distinguishing feature between the good and the bad reenactor? I might suggest there's lots of different reasons why they might be good or bad, but are they thinking of themselves or are they thinking of the audience? Now, personally, of course, I come from a presentation background, broadcasting and show, and I'm Mr. Showbiz. So how are people thinking about what they look like and what is the story they're trying to tell? And I think it's quite an interesting one, because I think the living history community who want to engage with their subject and explain it to others, hopefully, they might be exactly the kind of people who rather reject presentation, because they're kind of bored with presentation, because that's the thing they don't like watching on TV, because they watch every single doc they ever watch is littered with bungles, and as is, of course, drama. So there might actually be a resistance to presentation. Also, is the presenter of your group the best communicator in your group, or is he the man or woman who was too slow in getting another job on the gig? In other words, is your presenter actually the worst person that you have on your team actually fronting it up for you? And I think a lot of this, and this is where I'm going to sound like a really grim kind of guy, but I think if you're any good, you're doing your reenactment because it really means something to you. I had an experience once at the Duxford Air Show, and I was chatting to this guy who'd been a crew chief on B-17s or B-24s. I'm afraid I can't remember quite now. And I said to this guy, so what was, some broad opening question that got him to talk. And he was saying that, I said, so presumably, you were oversexed, overpaid over here, some numbnuts question asked in such a way that he would hopefully go no and actually tell me what he really thought. And he said, no, I wasn't. I never left the base once. I didn't drink. I didn't smoke when I was in the European theatre, because I went to bed. I got as much sleep as I possibly could, because I was absolutely petrified I would make a mistake and someone would die over Germany because my crew hadn't actually done the right thing to the aircraft. I thought, well done, mate. That's blown absolutely every single last thing I've heard about Yanks out of the water. I then said to him, okay, mate, well, so what would your perfect display be? Because at that time, the Sally B the B-17 was doing a lovely display, figures of 8, top side, underneath, wheels down, bomb bay open, blah, blah, blah. And at the end, fly through with a bit of glycol. I can't quite remember how they did it now, but something in the engine to make one of the engines smoke, and that was their tribute fly past. And I said to this guy, I said, so what would you do? And he said, well, you know what I would do? I would taxi the aircraft the full length of the crowd line, and then it would take off. It would go over the horizon, and it would never come back. I thought, okay, right, thank you. That's what a bloke actually thinks would symbolize and would actually be the appropriate display for the aircraft. That was a really interesting thought. So this always got me thinking, is what you're doing, coherent with the subject matter that you're doing? Now, if you're a Second World War reenactor, that's just great. But I notice you're not doing the British Army on the Rhine for 50 years. I notice you're not doing the Northern Ireland. I notice you're not doing those. So you're making an active choice to do the Second World War for a particular reason. Is it because you think it's about you're honouring the greatest generation? Do you think it's about freedom? What do you think it's about? Don't keep it a secret. Tell us why you're there. Tell us why you care. Because this is where I'm going to be a bit grim. Do you know what? People died. People died. Now, it's a very unusual hobby, which is based around the idea that people died, and they died violently, and they died away from their families, and it all went very, very wrong for them. So if you're going to do this thing, how deep your roots go. I'll give you a lightning example. Once again, from aviation. I hope that's not a problem for people. I was really interested. We used to do air shows, and Sean and I, we always did the commentary. We had to do it for everybody who turned up. Okay, not aviation nuts. In fact, we did very little for aviation people, because they always know far more about the aircraft than you do. So, don't try and, don't worry about that. They know the nuts, they know the rivets. Great. Your job is to explain the whole thing to everybody all of the time. Impossible, obviously. Anyway, we used to talk to 2 12-year-old kids. They were our audience. How simply were we explaining things? How engagingly we were explaining things to 2 people who were not interested in what was going on. Okay. I didn't mean we didn't do baby talk or anything. We flattered them by talking to them like adults. Right, here's my story. These two kids, right, they turn up with, I'm just going to say dad, stick with me on this, I'm not being sexist. They turn up with dad. And what does dad do? Dad walks around the thing, right, and disagrees with absolutely everything that the commentator ever says. Oh, they've got that wrong. They don't know that. They're a bunch of idiots. Why they're commentating on this? I've no idea, blah, blah, blah. And then the BBMF Lancaster turns up, comes in over the piano keys, comes over the threshold. Dad turns from some raving maniac factoid into some bloke who can't even speak. His lower lips bubbling, and he's deeply emotional. He's deeply emotional about what that aircraft means to him. Well, our commentaries we actually put on a whole display about it in the end, about what are these emotions that these aircraft are summoning up in. If it's summoning it up in you, are you communicating it, or are you or is your real ambition? And there's nothing wrong with it. If this is your ambition, fine. If you want to show people how slide works on a Thompson submachine gun, fantastic. But if you've got greater ambitions like that, are you actually genuinely conveying them to your audience, or are you keeping it a secret? Because those two 10-year-old, 12-year-old kids turn to dad and say, "What's the matter, dad?" And dad can't even tell them. He can't even unpack everything, all those cultural ideas and all those emotional ideas that are jam-packed into that Lancaster when it gets over. So, you're not reenacting a peace conference, are you? So can you please put some thought into why you're standing there, and then try and communicate why you're actually doing it? And that, I think, is we're going to talk later about hopes and ambitions, but that's what I'd like to say to enactors is be reenactors or historians, whatever you call yourselves, be as honest as you can about the reason why you're there. There's actually nothing wrong with being honest about why you're there. And if you are, you'll communicate a story 58 trillion times better than Joe Schmo will, however new and spangly his kit is. So they're just a series of thoughts, really.
And so much to unpack there. Thank you very much for that. People are loving what your passion and your comments there. And the things I'm thinking about, I'm going to bring John in a minute, is you're absolutely right. Maybe living historian reenactors have got into the point because they think that people think they're just dressing up and it's all silly. They're not confident enough to say why they're there and why they're doing. And maybe that's the public's fault and the academics who frown upon it, not welcome them into this arena and saying, be proud of what you do, why you're doing it. But I'm going to bring John in, the museum worker, because lots of things came up there about the visual, the Lancaster creating this, the noise, the vibration, the smell, all those emotions there coming over that a static exhibit in a museum doesn't do. And we'll bring Marcin later on, because the old museum idea of kind of a shop mannequin that's got a uniform on it, it doesn't convey a person. It doesn't convey, if all the faces are just white painted generic mannequins, it doesn't look like it's people. Whereas if you have living historians there, they've all got different faces. They're real. You can see the stubble. You can see the lines in there. It becomes a real thing. So, John, if you want to expand on what Jonathan said there, you've been a reenactor. You're an academic historian. You've written about history, and you're also involved in museum displays. So, harnessing the senses. What are your immediate reactions to what Jonathan said there?
So first off, I want to relate a little bit of a story because I can relate to that Lancaster flying over. I was standing in my hometown in New York at a farmer's market 3-4 years ago, visiting my parents, and I heard this sound, and I knew what it was immediately. And standing there in the middle of New York, looking up at the sky, and nobody else knows what's going on, and I'm completely speechless. I'd never seen a Lank in the air before, and it was amazing, and it's just one of those moments. But living history as a teaching tool is incredibly valuable, and seeing an airplane like that in the air and hearing that sound, and obviously it was way up, so I wouldn't smell the exhaust or anything like that, but on the ground, being able to convey those senses brings it home for a lot of people. Now, my personal experience, I started mainly because I had a very, very close relationship with my granddad, and I did it to I guess, get some understanding of what he experienced. Now, he was an infantry lieutenant on the front lines, and there's no way I was really going to be able to get an idea of what exactly he experienced, because, you know, there's no way you can experience people getting blown apart in front of you. It's a horrible thing, but there's an aspect of it that I needed for me as a historian, me as a way to get closer to my granddad, to be able to understand that. And so tactical reenactments in the mid to late 1990s was a way that I sort of did that. Now, it made me a better historian. It brought me around to the fact that I actually don't like tacticals because they're so ridiculous. You know, it's not a teaching tool other than something to rah-rah public, you know, let them get some idea of what the noise sounds like. As an older living historian, a couple years ago, I did an event down in Texas, and it was a public display event, and I'm sitting there, and I'm the gunner on the half track. And so I'm just, you know, popping off propane like it's going out of style. And I'm sitting here looking at the absurdity of the whole thing. Because in reality, and all I would have done is the infantry would have hunkered down. I would have sat there with the quad 50s and mowed down the entire field of Germans, and that would have been it. Doesn't really, you know, convey it. But as a teaching tool in the museum, we can then talk about, okay, how things evolved. And one of our big things was, you know, I think I said earlier, the evolution of the American rifleman. So you're showing how from the Brown Bess all the way up to the M16, and you're giving that public an awareness of how fast a rifleman could fire, and how that proceeded, how accurate things were, and how accuracy increases over time. And, you know, just what a soldier carried. And they can go into the museum and they can look at everything behind a case, but being able to stand there in front of them with all that equipment on and allow them to touch it and smell it and, you know, just feel it, it brings it home, you know, a lot more.
So if I'm following this, it's about living historian reenactors and the professions who use them, identifying what you can do with it and what you can't do with it. And this came up in the previous shows, that ultimately recreating World War II battles in some kind of flat public playing field arena doesn't really work. The hay, we've all seen it. The hay bales with the Germans behind, and then 100 meters away, the hay bales with the Americans behind, and two tanks kind of circling each other like gladiators in some kind of Colosseum environment. That ends up doing nobody any good at all. But if someone leads a Sherman tank around, is commentating on the microphone about what a Sherman tank can do and how they work together and how they would perhaps go hunting panthers in the Ardennes forest, and allow the tank there to fill in some of the visual information and then describe the rest of it by filling in the details. Imagine you're in the Ardennes in the winter. Imagine this. Then you're conveying something that is a better educational tool, and it's using the tools you have correctly and not trying to do with them what you can't do with them. So which leads me nicely into Marcel now, because the second armored trip that you do, so for those who don't know, this is an international group of historian reenactors from all over the world, America, Britain, Europe, who kind of get themselves into half tracks and M8 armored cars and Sherman tanks and jeeps and all the support vehicles, and they just drive around various places on commemorative trips. They've done them to Normandy, they've done them to the Ardennes, they've done them into the Czech Republic. And we're not talking about two vehicles, folks. We're talking about a column of 8 armored cars, 4 Sherman tanks, and they have all the recovery vehicles, and everybody's in uniform. And Marcel, you have been the photographer on the last few of these trips there. But they don't, when they go to these places, try and recreate the attack on the town, particularly because you end up not being able to do that, really. So what you can do, and I'll let you explain it in your own words, is you can recreate photographic images. You can recreate kind of the liberation parades. So expanding on this idea, and particularly talking about your work with museums and how you work with photos, how does living history enhance visually the understanding of the past?
Well, actually, it's a bit of a complex answer. What I when I first started out, I was surrounded by photographers who actually are event photographers. So they snap about 200 pictures and they post them a week later, and that's about it. And I found myself in a position that I was really looking for something else, because I was looking for the historic context, the background, what am I seeing, and not just 200 images randomly displayed on Facebook or Flickr or wherever. So basically, I started to do this storytelling, and there are a couple of aspects. First of all, I'm living quite close to Bastogne, Arnhem, and well, Normandy is about 6 hours, but it's doable. So basically, I'm in the center of the ETO, which enables me to actually do the projects I do at the actual sites, at the former battlefields. So by that, it just enhances the authenticity, and we are actually able to do historical reconstructions at the actual sites. That by itself adds a bit of a, I don't know, it's kind of a responsibility, and that all the people involved doing those recreations actually make sure that they are there for the right reason. That they dress up and get their gear in, just as it should be. And one of the strange things that happened to me early on was that as soon as you start doing these projects, certainly with Second Armored in Europe, at the actual site, you then notice that the sky is blue and the grass is green, and the images you see of Second World War are all black and white. And it's hard to imagine that actually the sun was shining in 1944, and that actually the sea was perfectly blue, and it all looked just marvelous. And so by that, I think many people are having this kind of distance to this black and white footage, if it's pictures or film, whatever. So it seems almost in our time of virtual reality, HD, 4K movies, visual effects, all the real footage seems almost ancient. So by adding the color and capture people that are actually aware of what they're doing and try to do it in the best way they can, just creates this very weird, almost eerie atmosphere. And after spending 1 or 2 days with about 200 guys in the fields of Normandy or Belgium, it's kind of, you're in this kind of Twilight Zone thing where it almost feels like you're there. But that can only happen, and that can only be done if everyone is aware of what they're doing and has the responsibility of showing the respect and honor the things they are doing. And it reminds me of there was going to be, before Corona kicked in, there was a conference in at the university in Rotterdam, and it was called The Image of War. And it was about the image the general public has about war in general, because the image of war we have is made by games and by movies and documentaries, and it's always a bit it's not a real thing. So it's kind of a shooting, and if you look at the public events with the reenactors shooting at each other, no one dies because everybody wants to go to the front and wants to shoot the Germans or the Americans. And so basically you end up with something that doesn't really look realistic at all. And the problem with that is, I believe, is that by doing that, the general public, certainly during public events, get this idea that it's kind of something funny, something nice. It's just preferably you go there with the whole family and the sun is shining and you're actually witnessing something, guys shooting blanks and you have to hold your, and it's just one spectacle.
It's about the management of the environment. I know I'm going to bring you back if you're going to an event,
yeah,
and you see a battle recreated in front of you, even if it's kind of the terrain is quite good, If you then see the Germans and the Brits at the beer tent later on, the illusion is broken a bit to some extent, isn't it? They're all there having a beer. There's no actual burials being done. While I've got that photo up on screen, this is the kind of thing you're doing, because this is a black and white, fairly poor quality wartime photo we have. Yes. And this is your recreation of it. That's the single image. But of course, your recreation of this was 3D. With what you're doing with museums, you could, because you're staging these reenactors it was the exact same lane. It was, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, actually, this was done with help of the guys of the 2nd Armor and 82nd Airborne Group from Belgium, where we actually managed to first of all find the actual location, which was kind of special, because all the historic material wasn't always correct to some degree, and we actually shot this image and a couple of more at the actual site, and of course this proves this can't be done by amateurs in regard to reenactment. The guys that actually studied the original footage or the images, they actually know what these guys were wearing. So and it just proves that history can be beneficial, and a reenactment done correctly can actually give something constructive, positive to the history of World War II and how we perceive it and what went on then. So,
I mean, this what could happen conceivably, and we will talk about the future and what we hope for the future in our last question, is that people could go to a museum, see that original black and white photo, which conveys something, and then walk through another door into a 3D created environment, either digitally, with a headset or with and then it's all because of the reenactors. You're enhancing the connection with it, because as we move into the future, the younger people are going to be more and more wanting all sensory stuff. The old idea of museums being, here's a black and white photo and a thing, and Taft Gillingham made the very good point that he likes seeing stuff in museums. I do like seeing stuff, but we also need to have the whole all visual thing as well. So again,
we do have something like that at the National Museum of the Marine Corps. We have a whole Bella Wood exhibit where you walk in and there's a screen in front of you, but it's like you're in the woods, and there are air cannons that are shooting air at you as shells are going off on the screen, and there is a full living history company that did this assault on a machine gun position, and it really sort of pulls you into the exhibit. It's incredibly well done. Yeah, I mean, stuff like that is really much more in demand museum wise.
Which will lead us, and we can come back to return to some of these themes later on, but it brings us up. The next thing to talk about is this idea that there is, however, some looking down on living historians by, I don't know, academia, history, the gatekeepers of history, in that if you had a museum environment and you invite a crusty historian who works out of his archives, who has done 10 books and has written about something, and you invite the living historian along who studied the same unit over the same period of time, there would be some kind of natural idea that the proper crusty historian with the leather patches on his tweed jacket is a real historian, but the guy who dresses up isn't a real historian because he dresses up. And if we're going to move down this path where visual storytelling, using living history, using reenactors, using vehicles, it becomes a normal thing, the industry will have to overcome the fact that these people are serious. So Jonathan, I'm going to bring you in again now, because again, you've done the commentary on the events, things like that. You as a writer, radio shows, this, that, and the other, but you've met, again, real historians, you've met reenactor historians. Is there a prejudice against the person who dresses up? And if so, why is there a prejudice, and how can we change it?
Well, there's no prejudice from me personally, because as I said before, no, I'm not some wonder guy. I'm just saying that because I come at it from this angle of, we have, got to do a show right here. You're working with who you've got. But just before I do, if I may, I just picked up on a remark that Jim Grundy said in the comments there. Right. He said that somebody challenged him that he was obsessed with death. I thought, man, I've heard, And he might like to borrow this thing that I've used because I heard it once, certainly not original by me, which is military historians like war about as much as oncologists like cancer. And that really informs the way I look at this. A bloke called Dave, he went past very quick. A lot of Daves, actually. He said it all boils down to showing some respect. And I think Dave's onto something there. Come back to all of that, but those are just two things that I saw there. Okay, so academic historian versus living historian. Well, okay, there's my sort of all-comers remark. But I've super valued both of them. I'll a bit more about that. Taff, you mentioned. I was in the studio doing TOMMIES, and I think, oh God, I don't actually know how a 1914-18 veteran pronounces the word LOOS. Not how the BBC pronunciation unit, they're a wonderful gang of people, how they pronounce it. How would they pronounce it? And of course, I ring Taff up, and he's spoken to enough of them that he could just tell me over the blower, and we're done. And bang, phone down. Do you know what? I've actually managed to forget. So that's why I said LOOS. But there you go. I need him for that. I also went and recorded him and his buddies down at their Great War Huts thing, marching and doing drill, because they can do the drill movements. And what's more, they do them in hobnail boots. And guess what? BBC Sound Archives only got probably rubber boots, probably recorded during the time of national service in the UK. So they can give me, they give me that kind of feedback. And then there's that old weight of kit. You know, how many times have you handed I've got a deactivated SMLE, of course I have. And every time you hand that to somebody, they go, God, that's heavy. Especially kids, they can't believe how heavy, they can't even lift it. These help me. These are some of the reasons for example, I shot a lot of weapons particularly in the States, because you can go to some gun mall and just shoot whatever the hell you like, which is pretty weird for a European, I've got to tell you. And I was shooting a Colt 45, sidearm, thinking this is interesting, universal American sidearm, ought to really try this. And I knocked this huge chunk out of my hand. Because I'm too stupid. I didn't realize the slide comes. I didn't know the slide come back because, of course, I'd loaded it. But at the same time, knocked a huge chunk out of myself, and there's claret flying all over the place. So anybody who actually holds the thing or talks to the people is always going to be of extreme interest to me. But at the same time, I want to stick up for really, really, really in-depth academics, because in my work, I follow footnote trails. Somebody says something interesting that suggests a story, and I think, right, okay, well, what's their footnote on that? And so I want to be reading something that's got footnotes. That's where history books start for me. If I haven't got a footnote, I'm really not terribly interested in it. And then that footnote leads me to another footnote that, with a bit of luck, tells me the actual document in the National Archives, and then hopefully to somebody who's written about that subject. And this got me an introduction to people like, TOMMIES was about the Signals War in the First World War, and getting in touch with people like John Ferris and Jim Beach, particularly Jim Beach. Liz Bruton, Phil Thing, whose name I can't remember. Oh God, you'll never forgive me. Phil Thing. But I want them to write dull academic articles, because I go to them for actual gritty facts and real comparative analysis. Yeah. By the way, I once wrote a history book for a TV series, a TV tie-in, and it started in the Georgian period. And I kid you not, I bought the Horrible Histories book about the Georgians, because I knew nothing, and I needed an idiot's guide to get me to the next idiot guide to get me deeper. And I wound up writing a book about Georgian furniture. Okay, so and also I love dull museums. I really love dull museums. On some days, I want to actually go and when they changed the First and Second World War gallery at the Imperial War Museum, which just shows how old I am, I was heartbroken, because there was far too much information. I'd never read all of it. I was doing these signals things, and I went to the Royal Air Force Museum in Hendon. They've got the most boring cabinets about aviation radios in the First World War you can possibly imagine. But I wanted it dull, because for that particular job, I wanted that particular kind of thing. And if you're going to work at battalion level documents and your platoon reports by if you're going to go there, you've got to respect the stuff that's simple, that it gets you in, and then know where to go. I think the real problem with this is if you go to A looking for B, or you go to B looking for A, then you'll run into the problems where you go, oh, academic historians are boring. No, they're not. They've just got a different sort of information, and I just try and use all of them and as much as possible. And just one very, very quick point. I got into a bit of trouble. I was commentating at the Cosford Air Show, and Hurricane was displaying, and this is picking up on your virtual reality point, and I was making this point that if you were 6 or 7 years old in the audience and you were watching this combat veteran Hurricane, okay, that plane won't fly forever. I was saying, if you're young, and I hope I said it a bit better than this, but if you're young and in your audience, and the audience today, you are seeing with your own eyes something that's going to stretch back by the time you're old enough 100 years to when it achieved that battle damage, and it won't be flying. So grab it with your eyeballs now, because it's not like me deliberately making an effort to see guys who fought in the First World War, thinking, because they of course knew people, or they were in living memory of knowing people who'd fought at Waterloo, who were old enough to know people at Malplaquet, who were old enough, you're way ahead of me on this, but it's just there's just a series of thoughts there about who you want at any one given moment and what kind of info you want changes absolutely minute by minute. It's going to the right person for the right time.
No, perfectly stated there. And exactly in my library of books, there are the books I go to during the day for fact checking that I love. And then there's the other type of book I will read at 11 o'clock at night before I go to bed, when I kind of want to relax a little bit, kind of unwind a bit, and I want a bit more story then. And I like them both, but they're there for different reasons. And it's like I can perfectly enjoy watching Kelly's Heroes one night, which is a kind of a not really very serious, but I enjoy it, and I can separate that from watching a serious documentary about the Holocaust, and I can get different things out of the two things. And someone said, Dave just said a minute ago about we're making a distinction between living history and academia, which is too binary. Of course, it's not that binary. There are academics who like living history. There are people like John who's academic and written and reenacted and works in museum. There's lots of overlaps, but I'm going to bring John in before I go to Marcel again, because again, in the museum environment, there's things you want to convey by an exhibit, there's things you want to convey by text, and there's things via visual medium. So it's understanding that within a museum, there are people going in of different ages, and you're trying to hit them with different things that will appeal to them. So is some of what Jonathan said there kind of resonating with you about how you go about presenting information to people?
Absolutely. I mean, in a museum environment, you tend to write for about an 8th grade level. So our exhibit labels are short. They're to the point. They give you a minimum of information, and then you're moving on to the next thing. So there's not a lot that you can convey with just the artifact. Now, obviously, you add images and everything along with that. It gives a bit more information. But being able to incorporate more audio visuals, like the Bella Wood exhibit that I mentioned, really adds to the feel and conveys that historic information a lot better. Adding in living historians, where you can have a museum exhibit talking about the artifacts there, and then actually having somebody there to portray a soldier from that period works even better. So yeah, I mean, layering it like that is huge. And it's interesting being both an academic historian and a living history guy. Sort of get the feel for of being looked down on as a living historian, but also can understand it because of the different training that goes into it. I'm a much better living historian because of my academic background personally. I'm a better academic because of my living history background. I know that, I know what it's like to fire an M1. And also I know what it's like to fire an M1 with blanks or live rounds, and there's a big difference between the two.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's interesting. I know I've sort of gone waffled a little bit here, but yeah, I mean, being both is really good. But you know, being able to incorporate that into the museum to enhance the visitor's experience and enhance the visuals there to tell that story really is fantastic.
I'm thinking of something you said and something Jonathan said about identification, in that I can see that a book has lots of footnotes and lots of acknowledgements and lots of the bibliography. I can see that, and my brain tells me that's more academic, and I can maybe see it on the other shelf of the bookshop, the museum bookshop, one that's more full of illustrations and things like that, and perhaps got ages 7 to 9 written on the front or something. So I know it's telling me a different thing. Just like when I'm choosing a restaurant, I could go for a quick fast food if I want that, or I can go for a 5-course meal and I can see it. But the problem with discerning living history and reenactment is most people haven't really got the tools to see the good stuff and see the bad stuff. Someone like yourself, John, who has, you know, you can see a bad person dressed as an American 29th Division guy. Marcel can now, but admitted himself he couldn't have made that distinction 20 years ago. I can, Jonathan probably can, but your average member of the public can't really maybe make those distinctions. So they're, and academia, they're tarring everybody with the same brush and can't make that distinction. So I'm going to bring Marcel in again now because he hasn't spoken for a while. So particularly at these events you attend to in Europe, because you said yourself, you live near Bastogne, you live near Arnhem, so you're there at commemorative time of year when there are people going there who had a relative killed. Do the public really see it? Can they tell when it's being done well and when it's being done badly, or do they just see a spectacle? What's your kind of feeling about how they view it all?
If they can tell the difference between an authentic display or a Farby and non-authentic display, it's hard to tell. I attended public events where actually the public was laughing about what was happening, and that's kind of sad and bad in every aspect. I mean, if you're talking about World War II living history, it's as Jonathan already said, it's about war. It's actually about, you know, recreating World War II. And World War II, like any war, wasn't a game or some fun or whatever. I mean, look at, and our perception, of course, has changed. I mean, look at the difference between The Longest Day from the 60s and Saving Private Ryan. So in some regard, we, the public, everyone is spoiled by this evolving technology and entertainment. Everything has to be in full HD or 4K. Everything has to be virtual. You have the games, and so everyone's expecting the spectacle, and it should be, you know, a lot of explosions and preferably fire explosions. And I'm honestly, sometimes I think that the public really doesn't care, as long as it looks like some kind of a war movie, and you know, and it's I think it's our responsibility to, and our sense of respect in that regard, to change that. And that's one of the reasons that historians don't take us, or take certain groups, not serious, because it's like, yeah, it's war playing, and it's far from reality. The question remains: do we want to show reality, and is it suitable for public events? Because public events are preferably for families and small kids and you know, everyone. And maybe you can recall what happened when people started to watch Saving Private Ryan the first 20 minutes. You know, there was a lot of discussion going on. Was it a bit too much? The fact of the matter is, it wasn't too much at all. Barely touching it. So yeah, I don't know if they know and if they can tell the difference. But obviously there's a lot of politics and money involved. And if you have local authorities that just want to present something that's appealing to everyone, and that's appealing to the sponsors, and that's appealing to, you know, the overall, you know, we have this kind of liberation kind of thing. So yeah, make it kind of an entertainment event. And there's a lot of work to do in that regard. And we should never forget, certainly in this time, war is not fun, and war should, it's people actually are dying.
Yeah.
Is it about commemorating something where actually a lot of people died to give us some sort of freedom? And I think there's a lot of work to do in that regard.
I think the word that's coming to my mind now is an orchestra needs a conductor, in that the tone has to be set by some central person. So at John's museum, having had experience of being a reenactor and also the academic side of things and how to work a museum, when he brought the half track in there and had he was conducting it to keep the tone right, to make sure it didn't get silly. They weren't just, it didn't become disrespectful. And I'm going to bring Jonathan in now, because as the commentator of a big event, you are the conductor now, and you are the one dictating the tone in many ways. And so how you present explosions, as Marcel was saying there, because you're kind of recreating death in front of, there are kids there on the flight line there watching this aircraft. So you can't be saying, and millions died in that, you can't. So how do you set the tone, and what should the tone be, I suppose?
Well, I can tell you, I set the tone. I cheat. It's very incredibly straightforward. For example, I will during the course of a complete day, I will present. I don't know how many people notice me doing this, but I'll put forward a completely opposing view, because I'm conflicted. I'm extremely conflicted. I'm deeply and powerfully moved by the Lancaster bomber, the trundling of a Sherman tank. But I'm very conflicted about the purpose of those war machines. The rifle I own, I can appreciate that as a piece of technical engineering. I can also appreciate the fact that it'll blow lumps off you. So it's only because I have this conflict within myself that I do this. But you will find that in the course of a day, I will present an entirely contrary view. I mean, for example, I don't think I've done a single display in which, and I'm not going to do the quote off the top of my head, but don't worry, I always have it written down. I actually say it word for word at any commentary, which is Wellington's remark. And I'm going to get this wrong, but it's essentially this, which is the only thing more melancholy than a battle lost is a battle won. The public like the outcome, but I lose a lot of friends. And talk about the husbands, the brothers, the uncles, and now, of course, the wives, the daughters, the aunties who don't come back from these conflicts. Talk about the total casualties of the event that's being talked about. I will slot these in around the event. I won't necessarily do it during the event. I'll just briefly talk about one display. In 1916, 2016, I should say, I'd kind of lived 100 years out of whack for several years. I was doing the commentary for the Great War Display Team, which is about a 10, 11 ship First World War replica aircraft display. It's, wonderfully staged and blah, blah, blah. And they had this very, very generic script. And I was looking at it thinking, because I, of course, was knee deep in the First World War at that point, I thought, I might read this stuff. Wang, out that went. And I did actually really quite a contentious presentation, effectively, all integrated with what was going on, because I'd actually seen the display probably 30 times. So I could actually do both at once. And basically putting forward some ideas which might be quite challenging for the audience. This was an air show audience, bear in mind, about actually what the Battle of the Somme had represented. For example, as I'm sure you all know, there is a line of reasoning where you can say the Battle of the Somme was a complete success. Did it cause German casualties? It certainly did. Did it push the Germans back? Well, yes, but 4 months after the end of the campaign in the Hindenburg Line going back in 1917. And did it push the Germans to the peace table? Well, not many people know about the German peace overtures in late 1916. In fact, that was one of the big stories we did on TOMMIES, because people don't really seem to know very much about it. So, okay, so I completely, in that case, I salved my conscience about the Great War Display Team by just completely rewriting their commentary. And, they didn't notice out there because, of course, they're pilots. They like flying. And their ground crew don't care. They're not listening to commentary. They go, not listening to that twerp, and so I got away with murder, you could reasonably argue. But we'll come on to another complicated thing, which is I'm often present when the Royal Air Force, by the way, I'll probably never work again at an air show because of what I'm about to say now, where the air show present for example, what they call a TAC demo or a roll demo. And the idea there is that, and the budget for this, of course, is millions and millions and millions of pounds, because they'll wang in a couple of, well, I'm going back a few years now, tornadoes, that's some ground guys, that's some blokes wearing, I can't remember the name of them technically, but looking like, inverted commas, terrorists running around, and they'll show you how they do overflies, and then they'll do some cannon fire and this kind of stuff. And I sit there, you know, deeply unhappy. But for me, it's funny that good old Donald Sutherland's turned up in the comments so much relating to Kelly's Hero, because he says in JFK, he says that war is the organizing principle upon which all societies are based. And if you don't understand what your tax dollar, your tax pound is going out there and paying for, and what the government wants to show you about what it's doing with its big fat jet fighters that it's selling to the Saudis to shoot up the people in Yemen, if you're not taking an interest in what's happening in your name with your money, then, you know, that's the reason, funnily enough, I actually will go along with those effectively government-sponsored displays, because I want to see what they want me to think about what they are up to. And the same sort of goes with some of the aspects of the historical things, which is, you know, why, you know, I take a great interest in this, because war, if you take a time like now, I'm talking about present events. You know, if you're watching this later, we were in the opening overs of this terrible business in the Ukraine, and you know, we see it in the culture. You know, what is war? War is a force that gives us meaning. Okay, suddenly you've got a unified somebody you're against. Suddenly you're all on a team. We saw this in COVID. You're all on a team. You've got something to root for, something to root against. People often say that it's a bit like war is a bit like adolescent love. You know, suddenly you've got something you'd actually die for. You know, on a Friday, no girl will touch you. On Monday, you wear a uniform. You know, I won't go into the details. But my point is that society changes utterly during the time of a war. Okay. And we see those cultural changes. You know, suddenly you can't be peace. You can't be pro-peace, because you must be pro-enemy. Yeah, it's complete insanity. In any other time of, you know, of cultural life, no one would say that, would hold that position for one moment. But the moment there's a war on, suddenly everything changes. So understanding that is a key part of this. You know, as our man Dave said, you know, show some respect. This is serious stuff. This, you know, and as a presenter, I have, as I say, commandeered or run away with stuff where I thought, oh, these guys aren't really engaging with this thing. I'm gonna make them do a better job than they probably plan to do. And if they come with their prepared thing and it's a little bit out of whack, I'll kind of correct that later in the day. Now, you could say, here's Jonathan with his big old opinions about what's right, what's wrong. You know, should I be putting a cork in it? But I'm interested about some of the views being exchanged during this week, because I think actually people do feel this responsibility. They do feel, Dave's, let's have some respect around here about what we're talking about. And that's just my view. I'll never work again now, because I've told you what I do behind the scenes. And the great thing is, organizers never ever listen to the commentary. You can actually say what you damn. They never do.
Well, no one's watching us. They're all there. No, there are a few people watching us, but it comes back to the power of all sensory imagery, which is how we're going to kind of move the conversation to now. In that, your point there about, you know, seeing a few years ago tornadoes coming in and fireballs, things like that, and that rat-a-tat and missiles being launched, albeit in a theatrical but very real environment. That conveys way more to someone about what their budget is being spent on military than reading the manifesto that comes through your door at election time that says we're spending this on. Reading about missiles, reading about how many we've got of this doesn't register in anything like the same way as seeing an air show where tornadoes are going and actually letting rip, which is the whole idea about the stigma that reenactment has from some quarters as being not good, is that whether it's not good or good, it's very visual and people remember it. And that's the thing about academic history, or those who are writing books, is that so many books just get lost in the ether. They're there. There's a copy in the British Library. They disappear. But I'm going to bring Marcel in now, because when we were doing our pre-test chat, we were talking about these second armored convoys that go through Europe, and they took them to the Czech Republic. Now, as we know, Czech Republic hasn't seen the same last 70 years as we've seen because of communism. So there you are. You're a 10-year-old boy in some town in Czech Republic, and you see, or you would have heard, a column of Sherman tanks and armored cars coming first, and then you would see it, and you'd see all these guys wearing the uniforms and with weapons slung over their shoulders, riding into your town there with all these sounds and smells that accompany that. They're going to have exactly the same memory of that, or as the 10-year-old in 1945 watching it for real, because of just how powerful that image is. So on that note, Marcel, when the work you're doing with museums, the point is this all-encompassing visual, all-sensory environment is going to be a very, very important way about how the world sees history. So to kind of my last question now, what is the future? What is the future for combining all these things? Academic history, museums, storytelling, and the visual media, reenacting. You've had the meetings, you're working with museums. What's the future going to be?
But the thing is, actually the same aspect as with public events. At some point, it's about money. That's just as it is. The thing is that museums just want to get a lot of guests, paying guests, visitors. And if it's no matter if it's in Normandy or in the Netherlands or Germany or Belgium, and I guess in Normandy it must be even worse, that everyone's fighting for the tourists to get in and to pay and to to keep basically the museum alive. That's one of the success stories behind some museums are already touching new technologies to stand out from the crowd. And with all due respect, that people don't read. If you have large displays with text in a museum, people don't care. They don't have the time. They don't want to read. It's just a waste of money and space. What they want to do is just experience something, which is a bit weird, but and I think to get back to the question is that the future is inevitable, that we have to present, or museums have to present the Second World War or any kind of war or historic event in an appealing way that people keep coming. And of course, older generations were satisfied with a couple of tanks and uniforms and some original gear on display. But I believe that future generations just want more. And sadly enough, but that's the way it is. If a family with a teenage children could make a choice between an old-fashioned museum and a museum where there's something happening, where there is some kind of an experience, whether it's not virtual or not, then I think they will go to where something is happening that's more game-like or movie-like. So yeah, I think we can't change the course that technology is going. Everyone's speaking. I'm not sure if you're aware with the metaverse, virtual reality, VR goggles. Apple is coming with VR goggles. There's a 360 video, 3D video, 180 degrees video in 3D. So basically, yeah, and there are some museums like the DD Experience Museum in Normandy. They're already pushing, forward by presenting World War II in a new way. And honestly, I think that's the way to go, because you can't stop that. People want to experience something and not only see dusty old uniforms, which by itself are totally awesome. I like them.
Absolutely.
But it's about money. It's about getting visitors as much as you can, and keep business going.
Yeah, well, I live in Normandy, where a couple of years ago it was announced there's going to be this new interpretive museum that got badly christened D-Day Land, which is not what anybody said, but it's people have then judged it to be some kind of theme park, and lots of people are getting very stuffy and sniffy about it, saying, because the basic principle is you, the audience, sit on some kind of stage that moves through an environment where you move from one hall where things happen around you, another hall where things happen around you, possibly with live actors, possibly with some kind of 3D thing created there. And people are getting very sniffy, saying it's not proper. Well, COVID aside, because that's affected visitor numbers, but the trend has been more and more people coming to Normandy year in, year out. But the old museums full of stuff in cabinets are not getting the visitors they used to. Their visits are going down. So whether or not the stuffy historians will poo-poo this new D-Day land, but that's not what it's going to be called. The public will decide. The public will probably go, because they'll better look at it as a family and go, you ride through there, you're better. We know how they'll advertise it. There'll be some incredible 30-second trailer that shows all the high spots. People will go, Mum, Dad, take me to that. And the dad will say, well, but there's a better historical museum that apparently has been there for 60 years, and it's got all the regimental roll of honors listed there on the walls, and they've got a book that was carried by an officer in 1943, and they'll go, Dad, we want to go to the one where we ride. So the public will decide. So I'm gonna bring John in now. So museums, so you obviously, as a museum in the USA, lots of competition. You've got to look to the future, you've got to look ahead. So presumably you and all your other museum friends are going to be embracing more and more of this living history 3D interpretation. So absolutely. What does the future hold? What do you think it should hold? What do you want it to be?
You hit the nail on the head. I mean, there is a lot of competition for that attention, for that dollar to bring that audience in through the door. We have to be relevant, and that's something that, unfortunately, for the pure academic historian, is a turnoff. But it's something that you have to do to stay alive. We try to strike a balance with that. I know at the Museum of the Marine Corps, we have a lot of interactives that bring the audience in and really make it more than just looking at stuff. A lot of people do want to see the stuff, obviously, but we try to interpret it in dioramas, full-scale dioramas around, say, our M50 Ontos in Vietnam. We've got a number of lifelike figures staged around it to give you a little bit more of a context. And more of that, that really seems to be one of the trends in at least in military museums in the U.S. So to give the visitor a bit more context, and then doing events like we did an event for Iwo Jima a couple weeks ago, where we brought out a number of artifacts that were actually in the battle. And there were actually 5 Iwo Jima veterans there too. So events like that are definitely a draw for the public, are going to be huge, going on in the future. Relevance is everything nowadays. And if, as long as you can stay relevant with something that will attract visitors, that will help you better teach the accurate history, the better you're going to be.
No, super stuff, and yeah, this is the direction we're going, and I think we'll bring both other guests in a minute, but there needs to be some examination by reenactors, from Jonathan's point earlier and the earlier shows this week, about what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how they can improve. There needs to be, I think, some more acceptance from the stuffy circles that this is going to be part of storytelling, whether they like it or not, and better to work with them and embrace it and bring them in on your side and collaborate than to just say, no, it's wrong. And I hope some of the historians, when I proposed this series of shows a few weeks ago, who are kind of firmly in the any kind of dressing up is wrong camp, are at the very least coming away from this thinking, dressing up can be good in the right environment, with the points you've made, with the right conductor, with the right tone, with the right environment, and with the authenticity up high. And again, not to treat the bad reenactors the way they, in the same way they treat obviously the other end of it now. So I'll bring in Marcel again now. So your work with museums, it's going to happen. There any kind of last things you feel you haven't been able to say this evening that you'd like to say about the whole reenactment world and where it's going, what it's been, and anything that you haven't said that you want to?
Well, actually, I was going to tell that earlier on, but I really hope that World War II reenactors, preferably living history reenactors, start to realize that they have some kind of responsibility, and they should perform their hobby or their passion with the utmost respect for what has happened. And I truly hope that living history reenactors and historians could and can work together, and maybe even in the museum environment, to tell and show the public about World War II history, and then and only then, with the right respect and mindset, new technology can make a difference to tell the right story. But I hope World War II and showing World War II doesn't become some kind of a Disneyland or some kind of entertainment where it's just about, entertainment and without any historic context or with any respect whatsoever.
That's a really good point. I think it leads to what I'm going to ask Jonathan now, because a theme that came up in both previous shows is the fundamental difference between someone doing this as a hobby is doing it because they absolutely want to. So if you're spending hours and hours and hours getting exactly the right shade Blanco to put on your 08 pattern webbing at your so-and-so event, or getting the thing there, as we had the incredible Joshua on the first show talking about the incredible work he does with his website, 10,000 photos scanned of the 100th division they put online, all that archival information they put there. You're doing that because you want to. The professional world, and I'm not criticizing anyone, but if museum workers, maybe it's a 9-to-5 job, maybe it's so the people who the enthusiasm of living historians needs to be harnessed, because if they want to get it right, they're going to spend hours and hours on their own time unpaid to get it right. So it would be stupid for academia and museums to not utilize that untapped kind of energy source there of finding information out. Because as Jonathan said, then we'll bring him in now, you can make one phone call to Taff and he'll give you the answer because he cared. Taff loves it. Taff, like me, was all loving talking about this. It's his job. It's Taff's job. But like me doing this channel, I would say it doesn't feel like a job because I love it. So Jonathan, we kind of started with you. We're going to come back to you. So the enthusiasm of doing something on an amateur basis is clearly something very real. But at the same time, as Marcel said there, that they need to look at themselves to kind of sometimes raise their game. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does. I'm talking here about the particularly the show, when you're putting something on rather than the hands-on feel the kit kind of stuff. I'm actually really, really optimistic about this because I think the idea that what I want to see is living historians really challenge themselves about what they want to do and how they can communicate that to their audience. And they might want to look at, and this isn't just because I'm a presenter and I gob on a stick, they might want to look at, if they have a figure to draw it all together, how they might be able to make their show just basically up their game and up there and make their message appropriate to them. I thought Josh was really interesting when he was saying, because he's only got 7 guys, this may be not exactly what he said, but because he's a Battle of the Bulge, how does a small unit feel about its isolation within the bigger picture, which is, really appropriate use of 7 guys. And I think that's really great because that's really ambitious. Now, I think people ought to be ambitious, and I think they ought to do different stuff. Don't be worried about getting it wrong in the best sense. If you have a plan to do a show a different way, try it. Don't go wildly off piece. That goes without saying. But try something different. Did it work? Keep it. Doesn't work? Dump it. Next time out, do something different. Keep it fresh for you, and you'll keep it fresh for your audience. Get an iPhone, right, or whatever it is you use. Lock it off on a nice high spot, okay, and then look back at your 45 minutes on a nice wide shot and just see, where were the gaps in the field? Where was the bit where nothing happened? Where was the bit which the audience really loved where somebody fell over? Maybe you're going to keep the bloke falling over in next time because war's got an awful lot of falling over in it, okay? okay, we talked about, Josh also talked about his pictures. And when he was talking about that, I thought about sound archive. If you've got sound archive and you're running your own commentary, play your sound archive over the speakers. Or if you haven't got sound archives, but you do have battalion war diaries that you've researched, get somebody to read those out. Or your commentator does them live, but you might do better to get somebody else, local professional actor or a local actor or an Amdram, get them to read that out for you. So it has a very different impact on the speaker because it's a different voice to your central voice. I've done a show where the two actors who were improvising as Mick Manock and Lanu Hawker, they were both dead. And the whole presentation was, well, Mick, before you were killed in combat, what did you do here? And Lanu, what did you do with your off-center gun? Because he didn't go through the propeller; he had an off-center duck gun, I think, mounted on the wing of some very primitive First World War aircraft. I've forgotten the details. Sorry, but so we had dead guys on set, and we never did it again. But it wasn't bad. It wasn't. It was just endlessly try something different. As I say, if you're I did a show for years for English Heritage, which was called My Kingdom for a Horse, which was an acknowledgement we didn't have enough bods. Okay, so we did 6 periods of history, I think it was, but as if it was a Victorian pageant. In other words, we knew our limitations and we wrote it so it would look like that. And there was accurate historical quotes, all sorts of bits and pieces. So have you got a guest star? If you've got some local guy and you bring him along, you interview him or her, live, bring them along, give them free lunch and whatever, but bring them along and show them. If you like talking to old guys, bring an old guy along and talk to him. It's getting a bit difficult to do these days, but lock a camera off, lock your phone off on a tripod and film these people you go and see so you don't lose it. And then you're part of the whole historical process. And we actually want to see all that stuff. So I'm hopeful. If people are now have never been better equipped with recording equipment, with cameras, with how they can put it together as a visual package, presentation skills are easily picked up because you just watch good people on the old YouTube there, on the good old internet, and look at what people are doing and think, what can we nick that? Which bit of what they're doing at that museum could we be doing live? Which bit of this could we do that? That's you're part of it. You're part of the whole big forward-moving idea of history and exploration and using history to interpret the world in which we now live, which for me personally is the purpose. So I just put that out to you. If you are in living history, welcome aboard. Let's come on, let's go and do groovy stuff. I want to go and stand in a field unbelievably, I want to go and stand in a field with you doing the new thing, the weird thing, the odd thing, the thing that hasn't been done before. Let's go and do that. Let's go and, and I really look forward to all of it. Thanks.
Thank you. And it's collaboration. It's working together. And the amount of times I've seen on YouTube, someone's filming at a living history event and there's the guy there behind that. First thing is they're behind a rope, which to me always says there's a barrier between us. I know there's safety issues of having weapons behind, and then the public will say, so what's that then? I'll say, it's a Browning 30 caliber machine gun. They produce X number of them between so and so and so. And you go, oh, no, you're going to start with a quote. Start with some Marine on Saipan who says, the M1 rifle I had there was my best friend because it kept me alive in combat. And when I had to replace it, it was like losing a friend. I mean, I've just made that one up. But the people who can, like Joshua, who knows what these guys said, think about storytelling. Think about engaging and reaching your audience and grabbing them with something there that makes them not just become fact regurgitation. So we'll end it in a minute, but basically museums need to bring in the skills of living historian reenactors because they've got passion, they've got enthusiasm, and they've got knowledge. We established that in the first 2 shows. The reenactment circles need to probably up their game about storytelling and communicating and being honest about what they do and conveying their reasons for it. I mean, it's notable that one part of the reason we're not tackling the wearing of German uniforms this week, although I do want to do it, is I basically couldn't find anybody who wanted to come on and talk about wearing German uniforms. I completely get that. I understand there's lots of things. There's been articles, there's been BBC documentaries and things where they've made them look bad. But so but if you are dressing up, you must have a reason for it. Think about why you're doing it and think about being able to convey it to people, but and everybody working together. So does any of you have any final points you want to make? John, anything from you? Last word?
A couple quick things. One of the things, we've talked about handling, dealing with death and talking about the realities of war. And one of the things in museums that really is sort of a movement to acknowledge, and we try to not pull any punches. I'm working on an exhibit right now on a rifle that we just got out of conservation. You and I have talked about it a little bit. That's going to be a memorial, and we were going to honestly talk about death, and it really is important to acknowledge, in the museum, and sort of bring that together. As far as living history in museums, I did want to just sort of, I guess, relate an experience that I had as a museum volunteer back in the late 1990s. I was volunteering up at the New England Air Museum in just north of Hartford, Connecticut, and they had a Tuskegee Airmen event, and Colonel Lee Archer, who was the top scoring Tuskegee Airman, was there, and I'm standing there in my full 15th Air Force Class A's, and Colonel Archer walks over to me and looks me up and down and goes, "You look perfect." And as a living historian, as an amateur historian at that point, or as a budding museum guy, I was actually working up at the Springfield Armory at the time. That was one of those pivotal moments that my effort, my research, my passion paid off more than I ever could have wanted, and it's sort of one of those pivotal moments in my life. And getting to spend some time with him and hearing his appreciation of living history was just outstanding.
No, I mean, that's a great way to end it. I mean, we've all in my past as a reenactor, I've had positive stories, as I've had negative stories, and I've seen good and I've seen bad, and again, we'll when we address the next round of shows about living history, and we know what the stick is, the detractors will beat us with. It's the fat paras, it's the people being too old, it's the lack of research. We know all that. We can't stop that, but except what we said at the beginning is we can maybe try and help raise the bar and bring the people up with the good people, and everyone will want to aspire to do it better. And if reenactors feel they're more welcome and more appreciated, maybe they'll up their game. If museums think they can bring more to their museums, they will bring them in more, and it all spirals upwards as opposed to potentially spiraling downwards, which is where it could be. So I will bring things to an end. I'll just say goodbye to people. Well, I'll say what we've got coming up, and I'll come back and say goodbye to you in a moment, folks. So I'm off this weekend. Then Monday, we start with Romania in World War II. 4 very, very interesting shows, because I don't know very much about Romania in World War II. And then finishing the week on Friday, an amazing show about the anniversary of MacArthur's escape from Corregidor with James Zobel, who's a historian I was speaking to last week. That's been an amazing show. There's lots of good stuff coming up next week. We've got shows on Thailand coming up. As usual, don't forget to subscribe. Few numbers have dropped a little bit the last few days, understandable with the horrific events that are happening in Ukraine. But those of you who are sticking with us and using your study of World War II to somehow escape from the study of the current war that's going on there, thank you for sticking with us. But right now, I'm going to say thank you very much. It was a lot of hair pulling out, which I haven't actually got any physically of this week, blending the guests together into the right shows, and some people were offended I didn't ask them to come on, and there was others the timing didn't work out. But I think these 3 shows have been really good, and the blend of guests has been really good, and we've brought some really important points up. So thank you very much, John. Thank you very much, Marcel. Thank you very much, Jonathan. We'll leave it at that. This is Paul Woodard for World War II TV saying I will see you all again after the weekend. Have a good, safe one everywhere, and thank you again for your attention. Cheers, everybody. Bye.